If any of you guys know Nara George, say hi to her for me. I really like the Birds and the Bees. They're one of my favorite bands. Um, I hope they do more stuff like they did in there. But can't can't always capture lightning in a bottle. Uh, sometimes you want to you see celebrities, you want to talk to them, but they're strangers. You don't know them, and you don't know their life or what they deal with, and you don't want to ruin it. You don't want to go out on a limb, stalk them down, and stand on top of them and say, "I really like your stuff." I mean, that would scare the fuck out of them. It'd be completely awkward. But I think everybody and their dog has that kind of fantasy of being with the people that they look up to. The thing that's really funny is that she's like 6 years younger than me, so it's kind of just a little bit awkward. But I think he might be my age, the other guy, the other person. But there's more to that group than just two people. I heard on the Spotify thing that there was like 6 people in that group or something like that. But I sent him a message via Twitter and I said, I don't know anybody that is like you. I mean, I really can't think of anybody. I think the closest I could ever come is Taco Ockers, and the guy that he had that was doing all of the synthesis and stuff. I would say that was about as close as I could come to saying the Bird and the Bee is like Taco Ockers, and he's the guy that did Putting on the Ritz. And when that album came out, that Taco album came out, the only thing that I could really liken it to was the guys in the malls that had the Wurlitzer organs that could play like anything, and just have all this automated accompaniment and stuff inside their songs, and that's kind of what Taco, the guy or maybe it's him that doing it, I don't know. I mean, I saw somebody in his music video and I'm thinking maybe that's the guy, but I don't know for sure. But his stuff is really automated. I mean, Bird and the Bee, they're not like so much. It doesn't sound like to me that they use a lot of automation, a lot of like arpeggiators and stuff like that. Like it sounds like he pretty much codes all that stuff into a sequencer himself. So he's more a composer. And Taco, on that album, how much of those songs were really his? And I mean, they're all copies of other people's music, re-synthesized and put into a modern beat. And the reason why I looked up to that album is that it had a lot of synthesis in it, and it was kind of rare to hear anything more than 6 or 7 voiced analog synthesis out of pretty much anything at that time. And then here comes this guy along and who's got like full chords synthesis, and you don't know if he's using Wurlitzer organs or if he's using Casio keyboards, or I mean, or if he's got analog synthesizers and he's just layering them over each other, or he couldn't possibly have used MIDI because MIDI came out in '83, and I think that album came out before '83. I'm not sure, and I'd have to go look it up. But maybe he did it on an Apple II with some Roland keyboard. I think I recall there was an way to interface with an Apple II before they came out with MIDI. I mean, before MIDI came out, the interface standard MIDI. Did you know that the modem frequency, the serial port frequency of the Amiga was the equivalent to the MIDI standard, which is 31,250. And so even though it didn't have a built-in MIDI port like the Atari 20 ST, or the did I say 20 ST? The Atari 512, was it 512 ST or something? it had some number to it, but as the Atari ST had a MIDI port in it to encourage people to write sequencer applications for it. So a lot of musicians started out with Atari STs. They started out with the Atari ST computers because the MIDI port was built right into the computer, and so that encouraged developers to write MIDI software. The only problem with the Atari ST is it really wasn't a multitasking operating system like the Amiga, and I guess Jay Miner, whenever they were coming up with the Amiga, probably thought, we can't put a MIDI port on this because the MIDI ports would probably cost too much. They're probably patented or something like that. But we'll just make the serial port the same. We'll support the 31250 baud MIDI format inside of the computer, so people can hook up their MIDI interfaces to the serial port, and then they could do MIDI with the Amigas. I thought that was kind of cool. When I bought my Amiga 1000, I got I'm trying to remember what the name of it was, but I got the sampling software that, I think it was a sampler, and then you could use the keyboards to control the sampler, and you could adjust for every octave. You could adjust what sample you used. It was something like Soundscape MIDI music sampler software or something or other, and it was super cool. It was super cool because you could hook a MIDI keyboard into the Amiga, and then you could play samples out of it, one per octave, and you could customize your loops. And on the screen, as you were adjusting your loops, because the screen resolution was so low, the Moray effect would give you some idea of where to set your loops, because you could, if you adjust the scale of your waveform, you can identify the repeating patterns of the waveform, and then you can select your loop points based upon what you see in the aliasing of the waveform on the screen. It was a little trick, and it worked really well. It was a great way of identifying loop points without listening to it. You could just okay, I can just adjust the scale of this waveform, and then I can see where all the possible loop points are, and then I can set up my loop points, and it worked fairly well. And it makes perfect sense, because if you're scaling your waveform up and down, it's can only show you a sampling, an equal width sampling down the waveform of all the samples. So if you scale it down, then it has the choice of taking 1 out of 2 samples, or 1 out of 2.5 samples, or 1 out of 2.7 samples. It's scaling it, and it's picking where it's going to pick the samples out, and that gives you a clue as to the waveforms that are inside of the sample, the possible complex waveforms. You can see them as you're scaling the thing up and down. It's showing you different sample points across that, and then you could figure out where, and so with that software, I figured that out, and that's probably how they picked their looping points for some software, was to look at that rather than having to sit there and listen to the sound and listen for the little ticks and things that would repeat, and when you're adjusting your sample loop points, if it's really too small, it's going to not sound. The thing is you have to pick enough samples to produce the tone, and if you pick too much less samples, then it changes the frequency of the waveform, as well as it changes the harmonics, as well as it reduces everything to square waveforms. And so what you want to do whenever you sample anything, you want to sample at a lower frequency, because you're going to get a lot more samples out at a lower frequency. If you do it at a high frequency, you're going to get fewer samples. And so you start out recording at a lower frequency, like the lowest part of the piano. If you're planning to use the same sample across all the octaves, you start out with the lowest note, or something that's and you could try it with all the notes on the piano and figure out which one is closest, probably by doing an FFT on it and then figuring out how close, which is the average. Or you could do an FFT on every single note and then pick the average of the FFT across all those, and that would get you your average. There's probably ways of doing that I don't even know about, but I mean, I just made that one up just now. That sounds like that would work. What an FFT is, a fast Fourier transform. It's really simple. You just take your waveform and turn it into a frequency spectra. And one thing you can do with that is you can extract. If you can recognize it, you can extract the dominant harmonics, and probably figure out what figure out where the notes are for any point in time for a sound or whatever. And there's probably programs that will reduce FFTs to like MIDI data, so that you can take a sample in and then it generates all these MIDI notes. But it doesn't. I've heard it doesn't work that well. That you have to do something. You have to do more than that to figure out what notes were used in the sound to produce the music. It's probably the case that whenever they involve more artificial intelligence, they'll be able to dig precise notes out of songs, and they can do that with those MIDI guitars. But I only know just a little bit thin veneer of synthesis and music and all that stuff in production. It's kind of like I just dabble in everything, and I don't really know a whole lot, and the only way I can make up for it is somehow bringing in some other something from somewhere else, and then somewhere trying to figure out how to connect the two together. Like if I had patch cables, I could connect something over here to something over there. One of these days somebody's going to figure out how to do a neural link from people's brains, and then I'll hook my neural link to an AI guy, and I'll just sit there and think up tunes to write, and then get really bored whenever I can't think up anything really smart, and so then I'll just leave it as I normally do. But the difference will be that I won't have to go and use the piano keyboard. I won't be limited by my fingers. What I'm able to do with my fingers, I'll be able to think of faster patterns and different kinds of patterns. And there are times whenever I wish I was Elton John, where I could just think up something and play it. And the other thing is that I know the reason why I'm not Elton John is because I don't know all the chording progressions, and I don't know anything about anything. I just know what I like, and it's kind of like I want to sound like him. I want to sound like them over there. I want to sound like that person. I want something that sounds like somewhere between that guy and that guy, And sometimes I'll get up on GarageBand and I'll put up a drum beat, and then I'll be like, wow, this sounds so great. And then I'll put a bass line on it and say, this sounds so great. And then I'll put some piano, I'll put just some chording progressions I just happen to know, and I'll put them in there, and then I'll be like, okay, now I can put a melody. And I'll put the melody in, and then I'm like, okay, how do I stop this bus and go somewhere other direction? And I go, screw it. And I just save it, and then I do it again. And one of these days, I'm going to take all that crap that I've recorded in the past, and I'm going to put it together, and I'm going to make something that sounds a little bit like something out of Abbey Road, where it's just a stringing together of a number of different songs with some sort of bridge in between them all, you know. And people would be like, "Hey, I really like your whatever the fuck that thing is that you made." Yeah. I've got some definite songs that I've made in the past. I made I used the first analog synthesizer for the iPad to make some music. It's available on SoundCloud. It's called Robot Rock and Reggae Rock, and or actually, it's called Reggae or Reggae Robot Rock or something like that. Um, I go under the name of Rise of the Thorax, or ROFTHORAX, and that's my that was an animation I made in school that I got an award for, and then I just kind of took on the name. And it was an animation of a bug going up a hill, and the inspiration for making it a bug is because I used to sing to the ants whenever I was a kid, and because their ants were always available. They were an audience that was always available, and it didn't matter how good or bad you sung, that they were there to listen to you. And so I would sing to the ants, and then I made an animation because I kind of saw myself as an ant of sorts, and I so I've always, the thing about ants is that they don't, they're not vicious. They do what they they kind of are just what they are, and that's what they do. And they see, and as you see them move around, and the choices they make, you get this feeling that there's something there more than a machine, that there's some personality to those ants, you know. But it's really funny whenever you find a dead ant, and they're all army ants, and they're like going up to the dead ant, and they're not biting on the guy. They're sitting there going, "Wait, he's dead? Is he really dead? Does anybody know? Can we send somebody out here to help this guy? You know?" And they're all kind of like looking at it, kind of like how we do whenever we go past a car that's been in a wreck on the highway. You're looking around to see what, if there's any bodies or anything. We do it for a different reason. We're like, hey, is there any dead bodies out there? Did they get all the dead bodies? It's a curiosity thing. But I think for the ants, it's like, this guy was doing something. Did anybody does anybody know what he was doing? Because I don't know what's going through their heads. And that's the thing about it. Whenever you look at animals or bugs or things, you want to kind of figure out what's going through their heads. Even though they're so small, you can't imagine them having a whole lot of thought process, but they seem to have a lot of thought process. And then now that we have these little memory cards that are like 128 gigabytes and they're that big, then you have to imagine that they're probably thinking a whole lot more than you could ever imagine, because 128 gigs will store, that's this small, will store 2 hours of VR180 video content. And then you got this little ant here, and he's some percentage of size of that card, and his brain is probably a good bit more than a gigabyte, of memory. And so there's a something more than just a machine in that little ant, that it probably has some emotions and some feelings and some concerns. And you've probably seen these. I was watching some video about mushrooms, and they were saying that that whenever if some ants, some soldier ants or whatever, some guard ants to the queen ant, if they sense that a worker has died to some sort of fungus, that they'll collect the body and they'll move it someplace else so that it doesn't spread to the hive, and the workers that will take it off will die to the fungus. And but I mean, that's when they detect that there's a fungus, and then they move it off to the side, and then the queen doesn't get it. How I got this, everybody will know because it was a recent documentary. I don't agree with the documentary completely because it's got some really far out ideas in there, but that's belief. There are a lot of people that people that believe that the little things make decisions and they change according to the decisions they make, and I don't know if that it's like, but maybe maybe it could be, or maybe the entire Earth is just one gigantic brain. People have a lot of ideas, and nobody knows. There's a lot of potential for magic there. And the only thing that I think is magical is the natural stuff. I don't think anything we can create is going to be magical at all. I think it's all, anything we create is just inspired by the stuff that exists. We don't make anything new, really. We just engineer what exists. That's all we do. And we might discover something about something that exists, but what is discovery at all but just finding out something? It's archaeology in this form. It's going in and digging into something and then trying to analyze it and figure out how it works. And once you figure out how it works, then you let everybody else know, and then they come in and they exploit it and engineer it, and that's that kind of sounds like great, but it's not to a degree, because you don't know what you're going to be doing with it that might destroy all that currently exists that's natural. And that's always that's the double-edged sword of sciences, is that when you're going forth into something to learn about something, that you have to respect it, because if you don't, you're going to disrespect it by exploiting it, and you're going to ruin everything else that's in relation to it. And that's the problem, is that when man starts to think that they're more than the nature around them, then they go and exploit it, and then it becomes it loses its magic, for one thing. People used to value something about nature, and then they don't value it anymore. But then there are other things that happen, like unforeseen consequences of stuff that they overlooked, certain stuff that they copied, the stuff they didn't copy, the stuff they didn't know about, the stuff that they didn't know about that was related to other stuff, and when they exploited this stuff, it ruined the feedback, it ruined the cycle of life, and then everything just ends up kind of not working perfectly. And that's the thing about technology that I've learned over the years, is that it doesn't ever really completely make everything better. It always is the idea that it gets funded with the idea that it's going to make it better, and then once it's done, it makes everything different. And then for some people, it's good for some things, but for the most part, it leaves certain other things in the past that were good, but now people don't do for some reason or another. I mean, there's just you can't put your finger on it and say this is what happens every time, or that what's happened. But the thing is to keep aware of the cool stuff, keep it in the back of your mind, and when somebody says, "Oh, this is great," this thing and say, yeah, it was pretty good, but not as great as in. And then you point back to it, and then people say, oh, you're an old fogey. And I said, yes, I am, but one day you'll be saying the same damn thing. And that's just reality. It's over time, every single person's going to have this experience either now or tomorrow, and in various forms. You'll be looking back and you say, man, this was like really cool. Why does cool stuff have to disappear? But this all started with Burden B, and I really like the Burden B, and I like the fact I can access them with Spotify, and and I like the fact that they're younger than me, so I don't have to worry about them dying anytime soon. No, I'm just kidding. The COVID thing is really changing that landscape, So you don't know, I think it's good to have heroes that are younger than you, for the same reason that it bothers you that there are heroes that are much older than you and are going to be dead soon. You're never going to get to meet them. But the ones that are younger than you might be able to get to meet them someday. I also thought to myself, what am I going to be in the next life? And if there is a next life or whatever it's going to end up being. And in my mind, this is the way I think about things. That, regardless of your belief system or whatever, I believe the things that are missing in this life, the things that have been lost, whatever you've lost in this life, hopefully you'll get it in the next, get it back in the next. And you can't say for everybody that it's going to be the same in the next life. Maybe it's a different kind of world in the next life. Maybe it's maybe it'll be worse than the one you're in now. Maybe it'll be better. You can't really know. Nobody can really know. But I think the better thing is to try to aspire to be something more than what you can be in this life. You see? So for me, it would be, I would like to be a muse. I would like to inspire musicians and artists and stuff. I'd like to be that ghost that kind of haunts all of the artists and kind of says, okay, you could do a little bit better here. That right there is really cool. And just like be able to do that, that for me would be my dream job. But I can't have that in this life, I can't even really approach that in this life. But that's like, in the next life, that's what I'm going to be, And if you do that, and I think some people do, they identify with their comic book hero, and they say, I want to be Superman, And then they dress up in the cape, and they know that they'll never fly, but maybe in the next life they'll be flying around. So I don't think it's a bad thing to think that to aspire to be something that you can't possibly be in this life. The things in this life, the people that are here right now that you would like to be, that's not good, because that means you're not thinking clear enough. You're not thinking ahead enough. You're not understanding that the people that you look for in this life might actually not be everything you think they are. And so you would say, I'd like to be like David Lee Roth, but not really David Lee Roth. I would like to be something beyond David Lee Roth. Like David Lee Roth is a point on a trajectory. He's a point on a trajectory, a direction. And so I want to be something beyond David Lee Roth. Of course, David Lee Roth is like, you but the thing is David has to realize that I don't know what he's like at all. But in my mind, what I think David Lee Roth is like, and I want to be beyond David Lee Roth, you see. So what you're using is the perceptual control point that determines what you think is the trajectory or the direction or the whatever it is. It tries to get you where you think you're going to go, and shoot for that. Even though you might not actually go there, you might go over here somewhere or over there, and then don't imagine that it's in this life that you're going to get it. Just say that's kind of what I identify with, is this guy or these groups of people, or maybe just this idea, and you're pushing for that idea. And keep in mind, in this world, we have only eyes, finger sense. We can taste things. We can smell that. I mean, there's significant things that we can do in sensing things, but we don't have absolute perception. Our perception is limited to what our noodle up here does, and we have to communicate with people. I mean, we're just a bunch of blind men in a room trying to recognize an elephant, right? That kind of idea. That's basically it. By ourselves, even if we think that we could control the world, we're probably going to end up miserably doing it like everybody else who's tried to control the world, or every country. Nobody does it well. You can't point to anybody and say, this guy did it really well, because unless they realized that they couldn't do it really well, and they had to rely on other people to help them do it really well. Because I would want to wonder if the people that we point to that says it did it really well were able to bring us out of a depression to something else, because that would say that they did something good. But whenever you've got things going and then you get another depression and nobody brings it out, then everybody looks like shit until somebody takes you out of the depression, and or takes you, or makes everything. So it's like, it's always a perspective. It's from a perspective of when it happens and where it's going, but it doesn't. It's not like you actually could say for precisely, unless you were one of the people around that person, to say, it was his fault. He could have done better. I could have done it just like him. I mean, how would you know if you were not one of the people right next to him? And there could be people next to him that say, I knew he was the problem, and they're trying to sell a book, but in the back of their mind, they're saying, I didn't really know this guy. I was just a few feet from him all the time, but I didn't know this guy. I'm just taking advantage of the fact that I was a few feet from him, And so the thing is that who do you interview to know anything about anybody? I mean, unless you were like somebody's best friend. Even my best friends don't even, from my youth, don't really know me all that well, because we didn't carry it on through. I mean, it's very rare for anybody to have their best friend with them all their life, and probably very dangerous, because if your best friend, if you ever made them into an enemy, they could dig up all sorts of crap about you, and you would be in trouble. You would not be able to live, without, and can you imagine somebody who's a celebrity since they were a child? And Christopher Walken's been in the business forever, ever since he was a boy. And when you've been in that long, you learn about celebrity from the very beginning, and you know how to deal with it. And it's probably the case that you just don't let anybody get to really know you, or you let a lot of people get to really know you. But anyhow, I'm stopping this video because I have a tendency to overtalk.